It's great to be with you. My name is Chennells. I'm going to be sharing with you some thoughts on how COVID has impacted the financial well-being of your employees and some things that you can do about that, including sharing a case study. COVID has impacted us in a number of ways. The three that I thought of that impact your retirement planning is that a number of employers have chosen to take contribution holidays. In other words, not contributing to the retirement fund savings for a few months. Some people have lost their income due to COVID, and we've experienced a real shock to the performance in the markets that have flown through to our savings. And so I want to tell you about how those have flown through into people's actual savings. The first one is good news. The contribution holiday, it affects quite a number of employers and employees, but has had negligible impact on people's savings. The second one is catastrophic. If you've lost your employment and have cashed out your savings, you'll be able to see from this slide that it will be very hard for you to make up for that. That's the bad news. The good news is it is possible to do something if you have the right tools, particularly if you're relatively young. If you think about a 30-year-old who was on track for a 75% replacement ratio, 75% of their pre-retirement income post-retirement, they'll be on track for about 50%, but can close that gap by contributing about 6% more or retiring about 11 years later. That becomes increasingly hard to do as you get older. The one impact, though, that's impacted everybody is the way that the markets have performed over the last 6 months and the 5 years before that. So I want to look at what the impact would be of that poor 5-year investment return on an individual who was on track for retirement prior to that. For someone who's about age 30, the impact is to go from a 75% replacement ratio to about 71%, which can be made up for by changing your contribution rate by 1% upwards or retiring about 2 years later. For a 50-year-old, obviously you've got a much bigger savings nest that was impacted by that investment anomaly over the last 5 years. And so they would be on track for now a 65% replacement ratio. The good news is that is also recoverable. You can recover to that 75% rate by increasing your contributions to 8%, or by 8%, or retiring about 5 years later. Now, for many of you, that seems very scary. Most people do not ever change their contribution rates. Is it possible? What I want to share with you today is some theory about how it's possible, some practice, what we're actually doing to make it possible, and then a case study. Firstly, the theory. The key thing that we sort of rest what we've built on is a paper that came out some years ago by a behavioral science duo called Save More Tomorrow. It tries to draw on this idea that you can pull on behavioral biases people have to get them to make astounding changes to their retirement savings. The basic theory is as your salary increases in the future, you actually create some space to save a little bit more as long as you make that choice up front. So what this paper looked at is real life examples at real companies of offering people the opportunity to contribute more today, or if they didn't want to do that, if they were not the kind of financially astute people who would make those sacrifices today, they then offered them the opportunity to do that steadily over time. And what they found is that the people who made the steady increases over time ended up with a much higher total increase than the people who were able to make an increase immediately. And about 78% of people made that over time, that Save More Tomorrow contribution increase, which is an incredible proportion. 4 out of 5 people changed their retirement trajectories when offered that as a solution. So Discovery set out to build that. How we've done that in practice is we've built something called the contribution optimizer, which I'm going to just dive straight into and demonstrate to you so you actually see it in real life. This is what it would look like for your employees if they were to experience it. What we do firstly is we ask a member to confirm an income goal in today's RAND terms. And this is something like everything in this contribution optimizer. They can simply click through if they like what we've suggested or adjust it to be appropriate to their specific circumstances. We then give you another option that you can simply click through if it's not appropriate. Do you have other retirement savings? Most people, they don't. so they can just move straight through this point. But if you do have other retirement savings, it's really important that we know about it, because it will have a huge impact on the projections. So for many people, they'll move straight through, but for some people, they'll input that critical piece of information. And then immediately, we're able to show to the individual their actual projected income in retirement. So that's real rands and cents that you can engage with as an individual and understand viscerally. And so if there is a big gap here between what you currently live on and what you're expecting to live on in the future, it's going to mean something to you. And so that can be quite a shock for people. And we find that this is a key change in perspective for people, where suddenly this whole thing of retirement savings becomes very, very real. And what we also find is that there's a spike at this point of willingness to do something about it. And so what we do is offer you a way to close that gap. We offer you a contribution optimizer. In fact, we give you two options. There's a slow way of making up that contribution gap, and there's a fast way of getting to that contribution required. And if you select either of those, it will close that gap for you and put you on track for a funded retirement. So simply by clicking here, you'll see that the gap closes entirely, and the person is now on track for a funded retirement. Just stop and think about that for a second. Most people, 95% of South Africans, are never on track for a funded retirement. And yet in about a 30-second to a minute and a half journey, someone can be on track for their savings, for their retirement. And that is such an incredible shift in mindset that it also creates a change in perspective around people, around how they'll think about that pot of money when they leave their fund one day. So that's an incredibly powerful thing. The next question you might be asking is, okay, that's all very fine, but does it work in practice? And so what I'm pleased to be able to share with you is a case study that we recently implemented of a large enough scheme for us to get reliable statistics out. So that's why I'm excited to share it. The caveat is that we only implemented this a couple of weeks ago before I pulled these stats. And so we only have 3 weeks of experience, but already the experience is so encouraging, it is worth sharing. The background is we drove a communications strategy through mostly emails through to the employee group. It was during this COVID time, so there were no on-site or one-on-one experiences. We recorded one webinar and shared that. And we found that we got quite a good level of engagement out of that. The headline statistic is almost unbelievable. And that is that people who've gone through this journey have changed their projected net replacement ratios by 59%. What that means is someone who would have retired with 10,000 Rand is now going to retire with 16,000 Rand. That is the difference between being able to pay your own rent and your food and not being able to do that. So it is a profound change in a person's trajectory. And this is into a fund where the previous trustees had been very hands-on and it had a very intentional communication strategy to try and get people to contribute more with very limited success. What's further interesting about that and is possibly the most surprising result is the level of contribution changes. Remember earlier I reflected that a person aged 50 who's experienced poor investment returns would need to increase their contributions by 8%. We found that people on average making a contribution optimizer change have set in motion a set of contribution changes that amount to, on average, 9.2%. Really an astounding level of a change in contributions that is actually happening in real life today. For people who were not able to have a contribution optimizer, either because their gap is too big or because they want to just make their own contribution changes, the average is 2.4%. Also, a very high level, a real significant change in people's trajectories, showing the power of presenting information in this way. And so in summary, I want to make a couple of points. The first is that people need help in closing their retirement savings gaps. Their gaps might be quite small if they were just on track but have experienced some poor investment returns, or could be very big if they've had massive shocks to that plan by, for example, cashing out their savings along the journey. The theory says it is possible to change people's trajectories, and that is encouraging. But more encouraging than that is that we have technology that can make that theory a reality, and that technology is working in practice today. And so I would hope, are asking yourself, are your employees being helped in this way? Are they able to see where they are headed for retirement and given implementable solutions to close that gap? And if the answer is no, we would love to help you with that. We think it's possible, and we think it is one of the most worthwhile things that certainly I feel I can devote my life to achieving. Thank you very much. I hope you've found that useful and interesting.